It's Hannah. She's in my class.
I know her.
She's Yumiko's friend, right?
Yeah, we had the same dissertation advisor too.
Oh, great. Who's that?
Take your seats, please. Very proud to welcome you to the Applied Linguistics and TESOL Program Apple Lecture for 2015 with our speaker, Professor James Paul Gee from Arizona State University. Gee, sorry. So I would like to ask you to take a moment and verify that you've turned off your cell phones, please. And I would like to warmly welcome our program chair, Professor Khan, to welcome our speaker. Thank you.
Okay. Well, what a great turnout. Thank you so much for coming to our 15th annual Apple Lecture series. So it's really a pleasure to see you all here, and it's a great pleasure to welcome our Apple speaker for this year, Professor James Gee, make sure I pronounce it correctly, from Arizona State University. It's truly an honor and privilege for us to have you here with us today. And this afternoon, Professor Gee already gave a very stimulating, thought-provoking talk, which really broadened our horizon. And for that, we're very, very grateful. And I know you're dying to hear him, especially those people who come just now to hear him talk about the things that he's passionate about. But do allow me a few minutes to recognize the outstanding contributions to this event. First and foremost, I would like to thank LINC, the Language Innovations Inc., for their generous contributions to this event. LINC is a group of talented ESL teachers who published books and grammar and ESL teaching materials. And that group disbanded in the 80s, right? Leslie, around the 80s, right? And they decided to give Teachers College the endowment that has made possible this Apple Lecture series. So let's give them a round of applause. Next, I'm looking at Leslie. I want to thank the founder of the Apple Lecture series, Professor Leslie Beebe, who's sitting here. Was coordinator of the Applied Linguistics program for many years, and she's a renowned sociolinguist. We're very fortunate to have her for many, many years, and she's still very active and she's still supporting our students, and she makes donations to our events too. I also want to thank the many, many volunteers who have participated in the preparation, the planning, and so forth of this event. So could those volunteers please wave your hand just to be recognized? This event is really our signature event. And because it's a signature event, it really takes many months of planning. And I want to thank Dr. Kirby Grabowski, who is our Apple liaison for this year. I also want to thank our two program associates, Ram Chan Lin and Andrea Durkis. Both of them are there. We worked many months. There are so many things to coordinate just to get the room for the Apple lecture. Takes many months. A typical Apple day starts with a web journal interview with the speaker in the morning, followed by an afternoon podium featuring the first talk of the speaker, then an early evening talk like this one now, open to the entire community. And this year, we're adding a new event to the Apple program, a meet and greet for prospective students, which happened between 3:15 and 4:15 today. How did that go, by the way? Went really well, right? Great, not surprising. And that event was coordinated by our student roundtable under the leadership of Katie Heil, Melissa Smith, Emily Jones, Vanessa Shaw, and Maddie Espino. A round of applause to them. The Applied Linguistics and TESOL program is a vibrant program. Other than the Apple event, we host many other socio-academic events throughout the year. So please take out your calendar. We'll have some more things. What happened? Okay. First of all, the TESOL certificate program is holding its annual, also signature open house on February the 19th. Okay, there's going to be food, there's going to be talent show, there's a lot of information sharing and so forth. Okay. Second thing, NICE TESOL Applied Linguistics Winter Conference is going to happen here at Teachers College. Once again, we're very proud to say that it's organized year after year by our own students. Okay, and Manny Espino sitting here is the chair of the Winter Conference, and he's working with a group of students, fantastic students. Okay, and the date for the Winter Conference is February the 21st. Is that right? Is it 21st?
March 7th.
Say it again, correct me.
March 7th.
Could you please stand up and say
February 21st is when the pre-registration ends. The conference date is March 7th. So.
Thank you. Then in April, we have 2 guest talks lined up. One is a talk on cognitive linguistics by Professor Andrea Tyler from Georgetown University, organized once again, I have to say, by our student roundtable. Okay? That's going to be on April the 10th, right? Okay. And we're going to send out flyers as we get closer to the date. And there's another guest talk scheduled for April, and this is going to be on April the 22nd. The guest speaker is Jim McWhorter, and he's going to talk about linguistic relativity. Okay? And there's something else that's in progress right now. Just continuing with something we started last year, a joint symposium between the Applied Linguistics and TESOL program and also the Bilingual and Bilingual Culture program. We're going to host another symposium for master students, okay? And what we plan to do is to reach out to NYU, to CUNY, and to really bring graduate students to Teachers College, okay? And once again, just look out for the flyer on that event, okay? So I really look forward to seeing you at all of those events, and I hope you will enjoy the talk tonight. And next, Dr. Kirby Grabowski will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
My name is Kirby, yes, there's no coincidence, like the former Sega game with the big pink person that would go around eating things. That's why I am the faculty liaison for this event with Professor G. And Professor Waring, for those of you who were here earlier today, promised you a very fancy introduction. For any of you who know me, that's not really my style. So I'll just be introducing Professor G in my own way. So we'd like to welcome James Paul G. Jim, he likes to be called. And he is the Mary Lou Fulton Presidential Professor of Literacy Studies and Regents Professor at Arizona State University. Now, for titles like that, someone with titles like that doesn't need me to list their various books and the boards that they serve on and everything else that they do, really. He's way, way beyond that, as you can see by the number of people we have in this room today. So in my research, we're all familiar with his work, obviously, because we're all sitting here today, but in my research to figure out a little bit more about his research interests beyond what I've read, I found his research expertise on the Arizona State University website. And I started reading through it. Achievement Gap Assessment, Cognitive and Neurosciences, Cognitive Processes and Development, Comprehension. You realize this is alphabetical order and we're only at C, right? Computers and Learning, Discourse, Processes and Studies, Engagement, Equity, Identity, Information Processing, Instructional Practices, Instructional Technology, Language Comprehension Development, Language Processes, L. We're at L. And on it goes. And because I was reading this on a web page, I thought maybe I had toggled over to the Teachers College academic catalog. This is how broad and deep his knowledge is. And I went, no, really, this is him. So we are so thrilled that he's here today. And the last thing I want to say is that the round table was so instrumental in getting Professor G here today. They created a survey and asked the students who they would really like to see come this year. And far and away, the winner of that survey contest is sitting right over there. We're so thankful that he was available and for the students for getting involved, because look at what happens when the students get involved. We're so thrilled that everybody was a part of this. Thank you again to all the volunteers, and especially to Ramchan and Andrea. I really do nothing except this little song and dance at the beginning of the lecture. And please stick around afterwards for the reception. We have wine in addition to some other food also. So please put your hands together. Welcome Professor G.
Thank you. They want me to use the mic this time because of the recording. I'd never heard that list before. Even I was impressed, but I didn't write it. I want to, this is going to be a talk about language, media, and experience. And I want to start with a couple of chicken and egg questions. And the first one is, which comes first, language or experience? See, you couldn't talk about the world, you couldn't think about the world if you didn't have some categories, some language, some representation, right? On the other hand, those categories and representations of the world are given meaning by the world, right? They have to apply to the world. So, is the best way to learn language to first learn some language and then go have some experiences and apply it? Or is the best way to first have some experiences and then learn some language, right? What's the relationship between the two? Now, of course, if you accept this at all, the one thing we do not want to do is teach language with no experience or have experience with no language, right? So probably you have to have both. And I want to argue that eventually that games and digital media illuminate this question in a very good way. Now, another way this has been put is it's the contrast between language as system, that is, as a grammar that gives you words with sort of meanings you could look up in dictionaries, right? And language as situation or situated, that is language that actually applies. This is actually a fairly trivial point, but it has big implications and we tend to ignore them constantly in education. So to give you an example, we all know at the system level what coffee means. Right? You know, but on the other hand, the actual situational meaning of coffee would, like any word, changes in the actual context you're in, right? So the coffee spilled, go get a mop. The coffee spilled, go get a broom. The coffee spilled, stack it again. You can feel your head changing images, changing the experiences to give the specific meaning, what I call the situated meaning, the situational meaning to coffee, right? Now, it's pretty clear that if all you had was the knowledge of English grammar and the lexical definitions of the words, but you couldn't do this sort of situating meaning, you would have worthless knowledge, right? Now, the other thing is we also can situate meanings that are brand new. You can make up new meanings on the spot. So you've probably never heard a sentence like big coffee is as bad as big oil. But you have absolutely no trouble knowing what big coffee means there. How did you do that? You just made up a meaning for something you've never heard using the system information that we have the word coffee, but that didn't help you know what this means. Well, obviously you did it because you have heard all these conversations about big oil and corporations and greed and stuff. You have immersed yourself in a bunch of experiences just by being around. And you, in microseconds, called up the right experience to give the right meaning for the first time in history to this word. And you do that all the time, right? So this is an argument that situating meaning is not like the old linguistic metaphor was we pull it out of a dictionary. It's just sitting in a lexicon in the head and you pull it out. You're actually making it up. You are actively making the meanings, not just pulling them out of something. All right, now to give you an example that's a little better than coffee, here is a remark made by the mayor of Bogota that observes, this guy observes that high-quality public pedestrian space in general and parks in particular are evidence of the democracy, of true democracy at work. Now, see, there, what is the system meaning of democracy? What is its kind of general meaning, its definition meaning? Well, voting, representation, voting for representatives, voting in government, right? Now, that system meaning doesn't help you much here, does it? How could it be that a true democracy can be measured by public space? Well, I thought true democracies were by voting, right? Well, you're making up meanings for that. Right now, you have to, and the dictionary definition of democracy is not helping you much. But I would venture to say here it's a little bit different than the big oil example, because my bet is you've had very different experiences of democracies, of countries, of controversies over democracy. You may be in different, well, not at Columbia, but you might have been in different parties had I been elsewhere. And you're then bringing that experience to try to figure out what this means, right? And that is, see, so when education is responsible for teaching the relationship between a system and the experiences that you have to give it situational meaning. So I think you can tell right away before we get to anything substantive that I'm going to be pushing the role of experience as almost an ethically charged notion for education, because I think what we do is we deny experience to people. We often give them language with no experience and tests with no experience. All right, now there's another chicken and egg question, and that is which comes first, learning or experience? Now, the reason this is a chicken egg question now is lots of work over the last 25 years in cognitive science, neuroscience, distributed intelligence, all sorts of different areas, has argued that humans learn from experience, right? That what you do is you have experiences, you store all of them in your head. Your long-term memory is virtually endless. You then use your past experiences to get ready for future action. When you have to solve a problem or do something, this is what all humans, the ones who don't do this by evolution are gone. You get ready for that action by thinking, well, based on past experience, what might happen? You actually can even role play in your mind based on having gone to a lot of weddings. What might happen if I insult the minister? What might, and I actually think about it, it's almost like a video game in your head. You role play enough based on your past experience to get good ideas about how to act so you don't screw up all the time. That's why, so experience is the basis of learning. So again, which comes first though? It's saying you really can't learn anything new unless you have old experiences to think about what to do. But what happens if you have, no experiences? Then how would you learn? Right? See, so which comes first? Well, it's kind of clear here. Experience comes first. But how could you learn anything in the experience when you have no previous experience to make any hypotheses, to make any guesses, without killing yourself? I mean, one thing is just go have an experience and find out that falling down a mine shaft doesn't work and you're dead. That was your one experience. So this is an interesting and important chicken and egg question. Now, over the years, last few years, I've become very interested in the connections between learning and language. And linguists, since they're responsible for linguistics and language, are not really interested in learning. I mean, they might be interested in language learning, but not other learning. And lots of linguists aren't least interested in language learning. And learning people are not interested in language because they're different disciplines. And so it is an open, you might say, well, what exactly does learning have to do with language? Right? Why should because I'm going to prate on about learning now, and you're going to say, well, it's not talking about language anymore. Well, here's the answer of what learning has to do with language and what language has to do with learning. And that is this guy. Do we know who he is? He's not Henry Jenkins. It's Paulo Freire. Now, Paulo Freire, see you youngins. God. Paulo Freire famously argued that reading the word and reading the world are equivalent processes. Right? Now, he probably meant this as a political statement. But what I'm going to tell you is this now is an empirical statement. It is the truth that, see, any of you in literacy in here know that human comprehension is the same faculties that comprehend language, comprehend both written language and oral language, and are the same faculties that comprehend what's meaningful in the world. As we do not have a separate comprehension faculty for oral language, one for written language, one for the world. We use the same one, right? And that's just a fact about the human brain. And so what I'm going to be arguing here is that you can't read words if you have not experienced what they're about in the world. And you really cannot learn anything from the world relevant to words unless you have also learned something about the words. These are equivalent processes. And so we want to talk about how do you learn what a word means, but that also means how do you learn from experience, right? These two questions are very similar. All right, now I'm going to go back to say to you that, so now we're going to take up this idea that people learn from experience, and then what do they use that experience for? To give situated meanings to language and to get ready for new problem-solving experiences. This is what humans do. Now, the going theory is, lots of research though, that experience in and of itself is actually not that good for learning because you could die, right? It's like, as I mentioned earlier, Mark Twain's famous remark that his uncle fell down a chimney and fell into the fire and died, so much for learning through experience. The fact of the matter is, humans are really built biologically and neurologically to learn from experience only of certain types. That you, in a sense, the experiences they learn best from are not any old experiences. They are experiences that have these features. That's why I'm calling them experience GL, meaning good for learning. So the first is, you have to have a lucid goal. You have to be in an experience. There has to be an action you need to take, and you have to have a goal in that experience, and you have to care about the outcome of the action. You also need somebody to help you manage your attention, because in experience, one of the things is too rich. There's too much to pay attention to. And if you're a newcomer, you don't know what to pay attention to, what to foreground, what to background, what's relevant and what's not. So you need your attention manager, or you waste an immense amount of time. And this is to say, the experience needs to be well designed. That is where somebody's made clear the goal, somebody has helped you manage your attention, somebody has set it up so you care. And that's what I call a well-designed experience. And that's, by the way, what teachers do. Although teachers now mean parents, mentors, machines, teachers in schools, and social groups. They do this for you, right? If you're going to become, I like birds, if you want to become what they call a birder, in the discourse of birding where people recognize you're a real birder, then it'll do you no good just to walk out and look for birds. You have to be put in experiences where you know what to pay attention to, how to look at the bird, how to look for the bird, and it has to matter to you. Right? The point about mattering, there has to be an action. Humans don't learn well if they don't have an action to take an experience, because they don't get any feedback from the world. But they also don't learn well if they don't care. And this is actually, when you care, when you put something's at stake, when you take an emotional charge on it, you process it quite differently. You process it much more deeply so that it gets integrated. The information you're learning gets integrated with your background knowledge and with your former experience in a much deeper, much more useful way. Right? That's why people learning, let's say, Spanish or French in a classroom, where they often don't care much, process the learning very superficially. Right? There's also research from years ago that shows that you can give humans a kind of logical problem and put it in abstract terms, and 75% of them fail it. We're just terrible at it. But if you translate it into more concrete terms where something is at stake, like catching cheaters, there's like a set of rules. How does this rule work? When you put it in terms where humans think something's at stake, and for evolutionary rules, humans are particularly good at catching cheaters. If you want to know why, I'll ask. You can ask. Then 75% of them get the very same problem correct. See, what this says is if you want people to fail in school, give them stuff to do they don't care about. and in abstract terms that make them care even less. If you want them to look really smart, give them stuff they care about in terms that make them care about it, right? All right, so I'm saying that as we make this now demand that language teachers or content teachers must give people experiences that situate meaning and that make them intelligent for the future. I don't mean progressive stuff, just turn people loose. And I do, this by the way shows that despite all this talk about we don't need teachers, every teaching is an ubiquitous act today, in the sense that more and more, and we'll see this, people are doing this for each other, through social groups, through schools and other stuff. All right, there's Paolo again. Now, I want to, I've given you a dilemma, and it's this a fundamental dilemma. I'm saying, look, there's two chicken and egg questions. Does language come before experience, or experience come before language? And does learning come first, or does experience come first? How do we manage this relationship? How do we see language and experience as not binaries, not opposites, not separate moments, but how do you actually solve this very real problem, which we don't solve well in school, right? Because we don't have much experience in school. We usually give a lot of language, but we don't give a lot of experience. And we don't always even manage, if we do give experience, we don't do well-designed experiences, right? So I'm going to give you an example of what I call a learning system that solves the problems I just talked about, right? Because I think the concrete examples are a much easier way to think of things. There's a danger with concrete examples, and you're all going to go out of here and say, Jim said I should make card games. This is an example. It can be done in many different ways. I am not pushing Yu-Gi-Oh at you. I am not pushing card games at you. I am pushing that the problems we've just dealt with are solvable only in systems, not in one-off deals. And I'm going to show you what a system looks like, and I got to pick one. All right, now, how many of you know what Yu-Gi-Oh is? Card game, right? Good, a lot of people know. Yeah, there are 10,000 cards. Kids as young as 6 or 7 play it, adults play it. And you have to pick out of all the cards you have, you may have several hundred, you pick 40 cards to make a deck. And you have to, in the deck, kind of anticipate what sort of deck you're holding. And I'm just alternately freezing and hot. You have to kind of anticipate the sort of deck your other guy will pick, because each card has different powers, different weaknesses, so it's pretty strategic. Now the game is very complicated. Yeah, I tried to learn to play it. My then 10-year-old was teaching me, but he beat me so fast, and then would say, "Dad, you're doing great. You want to play again?" That I never learned anything, right? But at any rate, and the other thing about Yu-Gi-Oh is you can't play if you can't read. And I'm going to show you in a minute. The language on the cards is very complicated, certainly at a very high reading level. And there's 10,000 cards, and the language on the card tells you what the card does. So obviously you can't do it if you don't know that language. And it's very small. That keeps adults away. Pretty small. All right, so let's get to it. This is just an example. So here's what you face in Yu-Gi-Oh. This is one card. I took it off a 7-year-old. I want you to notice, first of all, we have all this literature on, gee, school is tough. It's about 4th grade. It's academic language. It's complicated language. That damn high school chemistry book is a pain in the butt. This language is as academic and as arcanely technical as anything a kid sees in school, certainly at the age of 7. So it's the classificatory system. So all the stuff in the top is a classificatory system for the 10,000 cards. And then when this card is summoned, activate one of these effects. Target one equipped card, equipped to a monster on the field, destroy that card. Target one equipped card, equipped to a monster on the field, equip that target to this card. You want more of this? See, my point is, you have no idea what that means. And the moment that it's even worse because you say at the system level, at the dictionary level, I know what every word means. I know, but I haven't got any idea what that means, and I don't want any more of it. So this is exactly how kids feel when you give them texts of school without the game related to the text, without the activities, but they can know every word, but they say, I have no idea what this means. They're as frustrated with it, and they want as little more of it as you do right now, but you're going to get more. So one thing that's intriguing to me, this is great for metacognition. The kids playing the game, because these rules are pretty arcane, will argue over the correct interpretation of the rule. I mean, kind of like rabbinical scholars. And when they have a disagreement, they can go to look at copious rule books on the internet, right? And these are huge rule books, and they do, and then they argue over what that means. So here it says, in order to psychro summon a psychro monster, you need one tuner. Look for the tuner next to its type. The tuner monster and other face-up monsters you use for the synchro summon are called synchro material monsters. The sum of their levels is the level of synchro monster you can summon. And I've seen 7-year-olds read this. And I want you to get the effect that the Yu-Gi-Oh company has the very same problem you have. I don't care what you're teaching language. If you're teaching math, you got to get people to understand the language of mathematics. If you're teaching Spanish, you got to get them to understand at least one register of Spanish, not just Spanish, something where you actually could use it. If you're teaching chemistry, they got to understand the language of chemistry, right? And some of the languages you're teaching, the language of chemistry, the language of physics, are just as inane as the language of Yu-Gi-Oh! If you don't know what to do in physics. Now, the other thing is to say, when you look at language, whether it's nuclear physics or this, and you feel that is arcane, boring, and totally unlucid, it isn't. For the people who know what it means, it's as simple as anything. Right? What you're missing is there is no such thing as hard language. All language that actually gets situated in experience is easy. The 7-year-olds who read this, see, when I took these cards from these 7-year-olds, and they were crying, and I just try to make them feel better. I said, but I'm really impressed when I hear you guys talking the language of the game to each other and arguing the rules. I mean, you realize how complex this language is. And they said, it isn't complex at all. What are you talking about? It's simple. Well, and I guarantee you go to a quantum mechanics person or a physicist or a chemist who's really impassioned by what they do. They don't find the language hard. In fact, what the problem is, they can't understand why you find it hard. Just like the Yu-Gi-Oh guy can't understand why are you so stupid you think this is hard. All right, now, so my point is, the Yu-Gi-Oh company is facing a problem. I have got to solve the chicken and egg question. I have to get this language understood. I have to give experience. But how can they even know what to do with the experience if they don't know what the language says, right? Very same problem we face, with one difference. They will go broke if they don't solve it. Right? They will go broke. It's just like Yu-Gi-Oh has 10,000 cards. Okay, see, I'm not a real big fan of capitalism, but this part I really like. Capitalists never underestimate people if they have money. And the fact is, imagine when they wanted to have 10,000 cards, that a psychologist said, well, there's this magic number 7. Little kids can only kind of handle 7 to 8 distinctions. They can't, so you should have 7 cards. What's the capitalist going to say? If I can make money with 10,000, those damn little kids are going to learn 10,000 distinctions. And they do. There isn't actually no end to the number of distinctions they can learn. All right, so they have your problem. But let's see how they solve it. Let's see how they do it. How do they get to these dilemmas? And again, I'm not saying for you to go out and make everything a card game. All right, first thing you do is by the way, this is not in order. You don't do these things one after the other. You do them all together, you alternate, it's a system. So you give language situated meaning in this sense. The Yu-Gi-Oh card, every arcane bit you've heard there has a movement connected to it, or a place it's put, or something you say to the other player. Notice every piece of the language is attached to an image, to actions, and to a dialogue, right? It is attached to the world. It is not. So one of the things you certainly would not do is say, kids, we're going to learn Yu-Gi-Oh! Here's the Yu-Gi-Oh! Rule guide. Let me know when you finish reading it. That's what we do at school, right? Here's the textbook. Let me know when you read it. They'd be broke. What they're doing is they're going to say, look, we're going to set it up so that you're going to have some initial well-designed experiences where you won't fail, and what's going to be happening is you're going to see how each little technical word really fits into the world. That's what they're going to do. So you've got this pairing of language and action. The rule books and the websites exist to give you system information when you need it. You don't read them first. You only go to them after you know you need more information at that level, right? In fact, Yu-Gi-Oh! And other good learning systems use language just in time and on demand. That is, you either get a piece of this arcane language at a certain tutorial or a certain moment or within a game, just when you're going to apply it, just in time. You're going to see how it operates, just a little bit of it. Or you get a huge chunk in the rule book when you know you need it and want it. It's like the game Civilization. It comes with an encyclopedia, but you don't read it first. When you're really just on fire for Egypt, then you go read it, right? On demand. They use convergent media. This is Henry Jenkins' idea. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Company makes books, movies, and television shows, and these card games, as well as they have clubs in face-to-face, and they have computer versions of the game where you can even watch computer characters play it. And what that's doing is they're using every piece of media they can to teach, but in those medias, in the movies and the television shows and books, they give dramatic stories that are actually acting out the rules of the game. In other words, they're showing you nice monsters, but what they're really doing is they're playing out the rules in a dramatic story. It's directly showing you through different media how the language is matched to the action, but in a setting that's really making you care. It's, wow, that looked good, right? So you have convergent media. Low cost of failure. In other words, one of the things that all the people in the video game industry know is that if the cost of failure is high, people will not explore, they won't take risks, they won't try new styles, they won't learn new things and innovate, they get tunnel vision. So you have to lower the cost of failure because that exploratory period where you take risks without fear is so important to the early learning, right? Remember when I said well-designed experience is not sending the kid outdoors to get bitten by the black widow. You've got to put the kid in a sandbox that says, oh, I can take a risk and it won't kill me, right? That's the only way learning can start. The company ensures there are what I call affinity spaces. These are interest-driven groups on the internet of people who, from all different ages, all different areas of expertise, band together to talk about the game, review the game, write stories for the game, teach other about the game. And you go into one of those, they're all different styles, so you can choose your own style. And you can get, if you want a direct tutorial that's got lectures in it, there are 12-year-olds who've recorded all their Yu-Gi-Oh! Lectures, and you can get it that way. If you want a tutorial that shows you and actually annotates the games you play, you can get that. If you want a coach, you can get that. If you want to play and find somebody your level, you can get that. If you want advice, you can upload stuff and get it. You know, it's just, what's happening in this community is at every level there are people willing to teach you. And then as you go on, you have to be willing to teach them, right? If you know something they don't, you see. Some days you teach, some days you learn. So these affinity spaces are actually a distributed form of teaching, and they ain't fussy about ideology. They don't say lecturing is death. They say, you want to lecture in Yu-Gi-Oh? It's there. It's only death if a certain form of learning was forced on you, right? Now, the company and these affinity spaces, they help manage your attention and complexity in multiple ways. First of all, you can play against a computer, and it will give you simplified versions of the game that strip away many of the variables so that you don't get cognitive overload. They will show you in annotation. You pay attention to this, especially in social playing. You will learn where to do it. And so, but the way that I finally learned enough of this is by playing in the computer games. who didn't try to beat me so quickly. But what I was, in the beginning, the computer games just it's like a little fish tank. Here's going to be a little Yu-Gi-Oh game, and only a few of the variables are relevant, just the really important ones right now. So it's all really clear. Then when you get better, you can play against somebody real, but they put you at the same level as that guy, right? So if you're you language people, it's always I+1, always, right? So they also, all of this type of learning does not use time as a measurement of learning. See, in school, we say, okay, it's a 13-week algebra course, and in 13 weeks you get a grade. So we're using time is the measure. See, imagine this. Johnny takes a physics class. At the 13th week, he's got a C+. And then the 15th week, the course is over, but he does 2 more weeks on his own, and then he wins the Nobel Prize. Don't you feel silly? See, this game does not say, if you learn Yu-Gi-Oh! In 13 weeks, you're way smarter than her because she learned it in 17. Not when she's beating your butt, it doesn't say that, right? It says people start at different places, they have different trajectories, they have different goals. We measure achievement, not time, right? We measure mastery, not time. By the way, these are not age graded either, because if you're not going to measure on time, it doesn't matter how long you've been on Earth either. All right. Now, another thing that is extremely pervasive in the gaming culture is modding. Modding is the attitude that says, don't give me the game alone. Give me the tools by which you made the game so I can change it. I can even make my own games, right? This is called modding. So if you know Minecraft, today there are many modding communities where people have made their own versions of Minecraft and have got their own ideologies. This is part of the maker movement, right? It's part of the idea of young people saying, I want to be a producer, not just a consumer. Some of the mods are better than the original game, right? But what better way to learn a system other than to making it yourself or seeing the tools that were made it, right? So modding is it's great for metacognition. The other thing is Yu-Gi-Oh! Most games don't just give you a grade. There's a few of them do. I got the grade of Ninja Dog, Ninja Gaiden on one level. That's really not good learning. I mean, I felt like it's a hard game. I felt it was. By the way, Ninja Dog was like right F+. You finished the level, but he was really terrible. That's not good. Most games don't do that. In fact, what they do is they give you, they are in the community, the infinity spaces, plus the game, and the information the game is collecting, gives you, essentially you're being assessed on multiple variables about how you're growing towards mastery. That's why the game wants to say, we'll sort you with the other players that are at your level. It needs to know where are you in the stages to growth. Not, it doesn't say, well, you got a D now, so you should give up. Now, if you can do this with Halo. Halo collects tons of information about every click and what you're doing and what it means in the game. And if you allow your machine them to get the information, they take all the information from all the players around the world and they quantify them in multiple variables and make nice little graphs and will send back to you a bunch of information that says, here's where you stand in comparison to millions of other people on all these variables. Many real-time strategy games end with 24 graphs about how you did on many. You were doing great in taxation, not so well in technology. This guy was ahead of you in this age. But Rise of Nations, if you've never played it, the last part when you win or lose, you get so much information. It makes like kind of a math class look dumb. And what is the information for? It is grading you, but it's actually used as how to say what went wrong with my strategies. How will I get better at this the next time? And what good, when you give a kid, say you got a C+, does that help planning at all? When I tell you how you did on 14 variables against thousands of other players and different theories about how to play, are you going to be able to get ready for the next session? Yeah. And you're going to have massive meta-knowledge about the system, right? So they don't assess on what Bob Mislevy calls a drop out of the sky test. By the way, they don't give you courtesy A's. They don't dumb the grade down. All right, so that's a set of features that are going on all at once. convergent media, different ways to learn. There's the game, there's the computer games, there is the Definity space, the social groups. Sometimes you teach, sometimes you learn. There's language just in time and on demand. So what we have here is what I would call a learning system. And that learning system has a lot of moving parts in it, right? If you think about it, this is not designing a piece of equipment. It's not designing a lesson. It's not designing a pedagogy. It's designing a system. See, and my argument is that modern teachers will be like game designers, designers of good, well-designed experiences for learning, where learning means a form of representation, of language, and content. And in other words, teaching is an act of designing, just as a game designer designs an experience that will teach you how to solve problems. That's what Yu-Gi-Oh is doing. It's teaching you how to use an arcane language and a game to solve problems. That's what teachers will do. That's why when somebody says, well, let's just teach through games, or let's just teach through social media, let's teach Web 2.0. No, let's not. Let's teach with everything, properly put into a functioning system like Yu-Gi-Oh that wouldn't put you out of business if you want to market, right? So now, the moral of this is not to go make Yu-Gi-Oh. It's to think about how can I use convergent media, low cost of failure, language just in time and on demand. Which, different forms of teaching, different organizations. How am I going to put my system together? See, it's a creative act. But it's also, we do know a lot about what good systems look like. Now, one of the things, this is what I'm going to close on. So I'm not talking, you don't need a game. You can have any, you do have to have some experience. By the way, there's a wonderful game that your kids should definitely play. It was made by either God or nature, and it's out there. But it still has to be mentored, because there's too much stuff out there. But the fact is, of course, use that. With augmented reality, that can be out there free of charge. See, we know what augmented reality is, where you have a little handheld and puts fictional stuff on the real landscape. Why? Why bother to make the real landscape? Somebody made it. Use it free. Right? All right. Now, but what would be the role of games? How does game-based learning work? Well, the reason games are interesting at all for learning is all a game is problem solving, right? Any game has a set of problems that must be solved. And they get harder and harder. And if you don't solve them, you don't win. But also, if you can't solve them, or you're bored solving them, or you give up, the company goes broke. Now the company, until relatively recently, the way gaming culture worked, you can't dumb it down. Gamers don't want simple games, they don't want short games, they want challenge. So you can't dumb it down to get your consumer. You have to actually teach them to play the game, which means teaching them to solve the problem. Now, by the way, games can be made with any problem, right? So I'll just give you some examples. Here is the game, a Halo game, probably is Halo, you save the world from aliens. That's a real problem, and probably one we'll face soon. Here's another one, civilization. Here, you have to take a civilization against other ones, played by other people, and take it from the earliest age to the nuclear age. And you have to solve all of their problems in technology, taxation, war, diplomacy, for every century, right, against other people. And then you get a bunch of information about how you did it. See, now, it's a weird world, because wouldn't it be good to at least have seen if George Bush could have won this once? Right? I mean, wouldn't you want your mayor or your senator to, maybe they could play a couple of rounds of civilization to see if they could actually get us out of the Iron Age and not back into it. One of my all-time favorite games, any of you gamers know what this is, heartbreakingly wonderful game, Chibi Robo, Japanese, of course, was all a really crazy game for Japanese. And Chibi Robo, just to show you people you can make it on any problem. The problem here is he is a 4-inch house cleaning robot. And he has to clean the whole house, being only 4 inches tall. Just to get to the top of the chest of drawers, he's got to clean the chandeliers. I will tell you, those are hard problems. And what I loved about this game, first of all, I have never seen what the world looks like to a 4-inch thing. It's just, we humans we're middling. We're not real big. We don't know what it looks like to the universe, and we don't know what it looks like to an atom. but I do know what it looks like to a 4-inch house cleaning robot. Now, the other thing the guy has to do, he's a very nice man too, this little guy, I don't know what his gender is. He might have a gender. He has to keep families happy, and he gets happy. And they're very dysfunctional. They're getting a divorce. The children are totally traumatized. So the daughter is in a frog suit and will only say ribbit. Even the pets are traumatized. And he has to solve all their social problems and get them happy again. And finally, he notices at night there's some really weird things going on. Some of the toys, but not all of the toys, get animated. They move around. And he finds a robot, just like himself, but like 6 feet tall, in the basement, dead. No electricity. And he's got to figure out what's that robot doing in the basement, and he's got to find out why are the toys animal. Right? He's got a lot of tasks. And it's an incredibly fun game. But what's interesting to me when I'm around GDC, and there's a lot of games that I so what will make games hard is the day they make you cry. Well, when I finished this game and found out why the big robot was in the basement, I just cried like a baby. It's great. So the point is, don't tell me that you couldn't make a game about algebra if you can make one about a 4-inch house cleaning robot. But of course, somebody's already beat you to the algebra game. Most of the math games are pretty terrible. This one is superb. This is called Dragon Box, and it teaches algebra in a way that is so entertaining you can't stop playing it. And for the first time in your life, if you're like me and you've never really got algebra at a level of why anybody would want to do it, you all say, so that's what it was about. And that's because this game marries the game mechanic with what algebra actually does so beautifully. It's made by some people in Copenhagen, I think. Somebody out there in one of those countries that still have economies. And this is the game that I played just for pure fun. I picked it up, played it again and again. And what I love, now it's great preparation for learning for algebra because it gets clear to you what you're doing. And that it's a form of pattern recognition. That there are little rules that really spiffily work. And it starts, by the way, with representations that have no algebraic symbols in them. And then eventually you're actually solving equations that you just want to show your mother that you could do, right? The point here is games are good because they're problem spaces, and they teach just the way Yu-Gi-Oh does. So all the features I just gave you for Yu-Gi-Oh, with these games and in commercial games, they don't just give you the piece of software. The way Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't just give you the cards, remember? It gives you the convergent media, it gives you the affinity spaces, it operates by well-designed principles like don't give language it out of context, give it just the time and on. It does all that stuff. So all good games, like take Zelda. Zelda's got 50 billion affinity spaces around it. There are Zelda modded movies, there are books, there's fan fiction. There are people trying to figure out the story of all the Zelda games, and the last guy who did got a Nobel Prize. Very complex story. People have modded it. And it's been around for years. It's a moving system, and you can't look just at the Zelda game. You have to look at the whole system, the mods, the affinity spaces, the brilliant principles that are built into the design of Zelda as a teacher. Let me give you one example. You'd never think of this. I heard that people who've made the Zelda games over the years give a talk at GDC. The whole talk, some of you played Zelda, when you solve a problem, you get that little ding. The whole talk was about all the research they did to figure out the timing of the ding. And what they said, look, if it comes too early, it takes away your pride that you solved the problem. If it comes too late, it doesn't feel like a reward. They went through at a micro level to say exactly, well, this ding will be a reward, but not take away your sense of achievement. If you care about design at that level, imagine what are they doing? They are experimenting with thinking about feedback in a way that is profoundly deep about people's emotions, their sense of capacity, their sense of achievement. That's the tiniest part of the game. Now, they've made billions of dollars, so they have plenty of time. But you know, see, not only is the software not alone, but the software itself is a well-designed experience. It has been designed with all those principles I said. There is a teacher there, it's the game designer. If they are managing you see in Zelda, you always know where to go. The world is built in such a way that it helps you know, pay attention to this, pay attention. So you get my point. We always want to say, well, what's important is the technology, it's the software, it's the computer, it's the iPad. No, it isn't. It's those technologies in a learning system that has moving parts. Otherwise, those technologies are useless. All right, now, when I did Prairie and I told you wanted to know what is the connection between learning and language, and I said, well, it's because reading the world, which is having experiences, and therefore the foundation of learning, is equivalent to reading the word. You can't read the world if you haven't read the world. If you have no word, you have nothing but world. I kind of lied, because Freire actually went on to say this. In a way, however, we can go further and say that reading the word is not preceded merely by reading the world, but by a certain form of writing it or rewriting it. That is, it's transforming it by means of conscious, practical work. So what he's really saying is writing the world and reading and doing slow and give my little thing. Writing the world and writing the word are equally important as reading the world and reading the word, and maybe more important because maybe it's the capacity to rewrite the world that is the deep driving force behind both language and learning. And again, he said this is a political statement, but it's simply become empirical now. In the midst of the maker movement of pro-ams that are beating professional credentialed people in affinity spaces, what is the maker movement but demanding that with any tool we get, we write the world and not just read it? Thank you. Oh, you're doing something over here. Someone get out of your way. All right, questions, comments, rants, complaints. What do you think of Columbia? Maybe one of you should ask the question then.
Hello. Thank you for the talk. My question is about learning that's not connected to language. So in my research, I teach mathematics. I'm a game designer by trade. And when we do our clinical interviews after we've run them through the game, often I'll ask them about concepts of fractions. And the first thing they'll say to me is, I don't know how to put it into words.
Right.
But they can demonstrate it.
Well, they can demonstrate it with actions, but they can't. There is no learning without a representation. Right? They have to, at certain levels, if you're going to learn chemistry or mathematics, you have to be able to talk about it. You have to be able to read about it. It's not English, it could be mathematical symbols. And we also hope that when you say they can do it, it's not that they learned a ritual to do it, but they actually understand the underpinnings of fractions, right? Because then they will have legs for the future. So, you know, sooner or later, the kid has to get a representational system if they're going to make progress in physics or biology. I once asked a good biologist, you know, how much of the language of biology do you need to know to work in your lab? And she said, you do need to know some, but just enough to get in the discussion at the lab table. So then you'll learn the rest of it, right? So I have not seen kids who can solve a lot of it. Now, when they say they can't talk about it, they might be fearful they can't represent it to you in its final form because I'm still learning, right? Yu-Gi-Oh people have to represent some language what they're doing because you got to say stuff. You got to say I'm playing. That doesn't mean that when they begin to play, they know the full language. What they do know is there is a language to this, and as I get better at the actions, I will get better at the language because eventually the language, the representational system, makes me understand the experience in new ways, right? So in Dragon Box is a good example. It doesn't ask you in any way to represent a language, right? Because what it is about is getting that depthful understanding what this enterprise is. But you're not going to be, and if you want to stop there, that's fine. But you aren't going to join the community of people who are using math in the world for architecture or anything else without being able to talk their languages and use their representational systems. But they don't. So I suspect what I would hope is that not that your kids can articulate the language of mathematics, but that they know there is a representational system of symbols and stuff that are connected. I'm not talking about in mathematics in English. I'm talking about understanding what the equations mean. What is an equation? Why is it represented that way? What do the little symbols mean? And knowing what they mean in terms of the actions they are making you take. That would be the Yu-Gi-Oh perspective on it. But it's a controversial matter because we often think science is just thinking, but without the ability to communicate it, it's hard to know what good it is. But the biggest, there are a lot of people who say, especially for so-called at-risk kids, we shouldn't teach them the complicated academic languages of science because they just need to do it and be nurtured. Well, then we should pretty much shut them out of using it in many ways. But yeah, all right. I mean, we may disagree, in which case you're wrong, but otherwise, it's a controversial matter.
I guess so are you differentiating between the formalizations of the semiotics of the particular discipline, like in mathematical symbols, and then what they've actually learned that they can represent before they can participate in the symbol systems that represent the math?
Oh yeah, that's my entire point, is the symbol, it's like the Yu-Gi-Oh rulebook is the ultimate complicated encapsulation formal thing in the world. That comes last. But that doesn't mean that as the kid is growing in the capacity to see images, to pay attention to the right stuff in action, that they're not also looking for a label of that, looking for a way to do that, right? Because they're growing the language and the experience at the same time. The trouble is when you hand them the language with no experience, or you hand them large blocks of language not on demand. See, sooner or later, a kid is going to want to know, if they're really imagining, how do the pros do this? How do I talk about it? But not at the beginning. I mean, it's just like with civilization. Kids read the encyclopedia, especially if they want to model a whole new civilization. But that's well into your command of civilization in terms of the experience of many games and many stuff. Yes?
I can shout.
Go ahead, shout.
I work with middle schoolers, so. So one of the things that kind of that I was thinking about is a little bit. I've read Neil Postman's "Amusing Ourselves to Death."
Yeah.
I guess one of the things that I would be worried about balancing, in implementing these types of games in the classroom or these types of experiences, is trying to make sure that students aren't just learning because they're being amused or being cajoled into learning or anything like that. So I was wondering, I don't know, if you could talk about balancing between just getting students to tricking students into learning by amusing them versus.
But see, but I'm not arguing to use the game. I mean, if you're using the game just to entertain and amuse, I call it chocolate and broccoli. You're wasting your time. Not that there isn't good to waste time. It can be quite good. In fact, most of what you do in school is a waste of time. But nonetheless, something ought to be productive. I'm talking about a learning system. So if you have a game there, that game is not there just to amuse. It is to be part of the whole system of learning. It's partly there. See, let's take Portal. You've probably played Portal. Portal is a game which gives you a portal gun, and you can make a blue portal and orange portal, and you can go when you go through one, you come out the other. The portals obey certain laws of physics, and you are being examined by a maniacal robot in laboratory spaces. Unless you get out of it, she's going to judge you stupid, and later you're going to be killed. So it's motivating. And so it's just about discovering how you use the physics of the world. Like, for example, to go across the top of a room to get to another level. You have to know it's obeying laws of conservation momentum, and then you have to understand the angular perspectives of the velocity and stuff in order to do it. Now, when you play the game, you are not articulating anything in the game. The game does not require you to say or write anything. So people say, well, you're not really learning physics because you're not articulating physics. Well, no. What you're doing is you're getting the tacit, embodied meanings of physics, the situational meanings. Then you can go, you will be able to know what the language attaches to. Now, it turns out, I often give examples of this. The kids, or even adults, who get really interested in Portal, go into these affinity spaces and they start to articulate all the physics for other people. They put links to real physics. They build mods that change the physics. So if you only look at the game, you say, well, they're not learning physics. They're just going through the air. No, look at the game plus the mods plus the affinity space, and then even Portal EDU, which is all good. And you say, wow, there's a curriculum here. But the curriculum says, first get these tacit understandings, then learn to marry it to some words. Maybe you'll even get deeper ones when the words teach you something about how the concept applies. You can mod it to see how you change it. Then, it's a cycle. By the way, Andy's Dessess's old boxer worked just this way. It's a cycle of going through those things through time. So no, and if the game isn't doing that, use something else. But no, by the way, games are not, if you're a real gamer, you know that it is not true that games are fun. When I started playing games, I had full head of hair. I was 55, I looked 20. That night, I looked 75. I was totally unprepared for how hard it was and how much grit it required to do. I have broken controllers. I have went into rants, raves over games. The thing about a game is not that it's fun. It's engaging to the point where you will go through the periods of frustration, which is what ultimately is a kind of flow. The miracle of a game is that after you are so frustrated you want to cry, you don't give up. But in school, you don't even need to get to a point of frustration to leave the algebra lesson. Right? So, and the answer is don't make the algebra fun. Make it as deeply engaging as the game so that when you hit that period of frustration or failure, you have grit and you go past it. Yes, way in the back.
Yeah, do you have any good examples of ways that, what you're talking about, all this game stuff has been implemented in more of a formal education setting?
Well, there are a lot of people putting games in schools, the cottage industry now. And it should, now, no, I don't approve of most of it because they see themselves as just putting a game in school. That's like putting a textbook in school. You're putting one thing that everybody's going to use the same way for the same stuff. We already know that fails. Now, having said that, if you want to see examples, some of them are better, look, two things. Look at the Cooney Center's website. Cooney Center is the Joan Gann's Cooney Center website. It's the Center for Sesame Street Centers for Games. And it has written reports on how teachers use games. It's got plenty of examples, as does Common Sense Media, another good site. If you want to see a curriculum designed as a system using games with other stuff, there are two public schools, one in Chicago, one in New York, funded by MacArthur and designed by game designers called, so go look at their Quest to Teach, made here in New York by the Institute of Learning. Now, I've been in those schools, look at the design document for it. Just go look at that design document is a perfect example of not saying, let's put a game in school, but let's put a well-designed learning system in school, with all the moving parts. So they have boss levels, the tests become boss levels. And it's not just digital, it's done all over.
Dr. G,
Yep.
sorry, it's the Institute of Play and it's Quest to Learn.
Institute of Play is the nonprofit that made it. At the time, Katie Salemman, a brilliant New York game designer, now I think living in Turkey. So Institute of Play has loads of material on game-based learning that is deeply about systems. And their schools are called Quest to Teach.
Quest to Learn.
Quest to Learn. And we actually had issued up some games called Quest to Teach. They're not as good, but they're the Quest to Learn schools, and they're good. Now, I was in the Chicago one, which I was very impressed. It's all African American kids, and they were just doing fabulous. They were so engaged. They were doing a writing workshop, and they were just treating each other as colleagues. And I just thought, well, this is wonderful. And the results on that part of the curriculum were quite good. And they're starting with 1 grade and then move up. And I said, oh, how many of you guys will stay here for high school? And less than half of them said yes. And I said, why? You don't like it? So no, we love it. And we really think we're learning. But the trouble is, I don't know if this will get us into college, because back in old school, they were filling out all these drill sheets. And we're concerned that if you don't fill those drill sheets out, maybe you can't go to college. You see, they still held a wretched theory of school that somebody had given them. And they were willing, they were so distrustful that when you feel like you're learning and making progress, it must not be right, because otherwise those other adults would have done it. What you need is to have them read my book, The Anti-Education Era, which is about, it was originally going to be called On Human Stupidity. The publishers wouldn't let me do it. But that child needs to know that lots of adults are stupid. Any other? I don't exclude myself. Yes? Yes?
I completely agree that in a lot of ways the system that's currently out there is broken, and that we do need to come up with an educational system as teachers. If we're trying to start instituting that, I think one thing that's difficult for most of us as teachers is that we don't have the experience of having done that.
Yeah, because you got deprofessionalized.
Exactly.
Somebody locked you up, took away your experiences, crippled you, and then you say, I can't run the race because they put these chains on me. You got to take the chains off. I mean, you're not going to run the race with the chains on.
And that was none of our professors here, just to clarify. But my question is, like, if we were to start to try to put together like a system for teaching, what elements do you think we should start incorporating? Like, what do you think the most important? Like, where should we start?
I could give a whole nother talk on this. So first of all, be sure you've read John Hattie on visible schools and visible learning, because he gives the empirical research in teaching. And you're going to read that book and you say, I could have told Hattie this. But it's neither right-wing or left-wing, and his newest book will come out with 20 examples of schools that are functioning well, and you will see that the fundamental principles of what works in teaching are pretty much what I just gave you. Second thing is that the only way you can go back to seeing yourself as a designer, as a professional, is to take back your professionalization, and you can't do that alone. I never encouraged adults to play video games because I don't want them to sue me. It's really frustrating if you haven't done it in the 50s, 60s. But one guy, from Chicago, went out after a talk and played one, and I ran into him again later sometime, and he said, I got a story to tell you. Against your advice, I'm going to play this game. And I was really getting angry. I mean, just really frustrated. I was saying nasty words. And his 21-year-old son came in and said, Dad, what are you doing? And he said, I'm trying to learn this effing game. And here's what the son said to him. What would possess you to do that alone? You see, baby boomers and school people think, oh, their fallback position is do it alone. That's not how young gamers do stuff. You do it. So there are plenty of affinity spaces where teachers are designing games, where they're taking back professionalization. Do what a kid would do. If he wanted to design for The Sims, find one of those spaces that fits your personality. Some are tough love, some are not. And then, with those people do it, right? But professional architects don't just design the whole thing by themselves. They have other architects around them. And then insist as a teacher, I will not take curriculum from you. I will vet ideas from you, but I will put it into the system, right? Because I know my kids. Never let a test score ever trump the knowledge you have from experience of your kids. Because your score has got a situated meaning, a real meaning. Their score only has a system meaning, right? But look, the other thing I disagree with is that the schools are not functioning. I mean, Dino Goldstein has a nice book out on the history of teacher training, which has been said a lot. And you will see if you read the book. It's a very good book. You probably know all of it already. Nothing has changed for 100 years. Right? Every complaint, all the accountability stuff, it's all been there for 100 years. Schools of ed and schools have not fundamentally changed, and the critique has not fundamentally changed for 100 years. So, when I see a system like our schools, where there is plenty of innovation at the margins, I don't deny there's many innovations, including in some very urban schools, but where the system itself is not changing, hasn't changed for 100 years, despite billions of dollars about school reform, the system must be functioning. We must be wrong about its goal, right? Humans are not that stupid. The fact is, this didn't run this way for 100 years under all these pressures if it isn't functioning. And so I look at the schools today, the system we currently have, and I think it's functioning perfectly. It is meant to produce service workers. For 3/5 of the schools are meant to produce service workers for places like Walmart. And then some of them are meant to produce technicians. And then a tiny number of elite schools, like Columbia, are there to produce the last remaining people who will have ego-satisfying, good-paying jobs if you get out of education. So they're doing what they've always done. They're responding to the demographics of the market. And the fact of the matter is, if you're behind closed doors, that's what lots of people wanted to do, right? Even liberals. So a liberal will say, yeah, I want every kid to learn deeply, to really know what math means, but the competition to get into Stanford is inane. They really don't want to produce 100% more competition for their kid. You say to them, well, do you want now every minority, every poor white kid to compete with your kid to go to Stanford? They're not so liberal anymore, right? I mean, so we ought to stop talking about school reform and talk about society reform. Because you see, if you have a good idea for school reform, it won't fit in any old society, right? You say you might have the best idea in the world for a school. You have to change the context it's going to go in. Otherwise, that content will co-opt everything you're trying. So we keep thinking the school reform can be talked about without society reform, right? And it's not our job, it's somebody else's. But the point is, we just play into the bad guys, because what you're doing that way is you're saying, you don't need to make the country more equitable. I can still give you good school. You don't need to give people health care. I can still, no, actually do need to change the society, because this project now is different, right? And so, I actually think liberals exist to pitch softballs to conservatives, right? With the best of intentions, you're saying to them, oh, don't change. No, get out there and say, I'm the pro, and I'm not going to tell you how to change school. I'm going to tell you how to change the society, right? If you say what you really want is people to really learn deeply, I'll tell you, that's going to, it's like in the New Testament, Christ says to the rich guy, he says, I want to follow you, and Christ says, okay, first go away and give all your money away, then come back. And the guy says, no, that I can't do. How are we doing for time? Are we okay?
Still have 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. I could give a talk. Yes.
I have one question about the card game. Yeah, like most of the kids, when they learn the movement, they kind of forget the language on the card. And when they discuss the card, they don't use the terms on the card. They use what they understand the movement is. So kind of
not all the kids I see do that, but that strategy, and there are kids who do that, won't work for long, because remember, this company keeps putting out new cards. I mean, they're up to 10,000. They're going to go to 1 billion. So because they keep making money. So even if you had ritualized a card, which is fine, that is a strategy and that's good. The language does keep changing. This is a dynamic system. The rules change. The cards change. Now the reason some kids. There's other parts of it where the language is very important. So one of the big things kids do is they counterfeit cards, and then you really got to know the language. Because cards have different stars on them and stuff. But you see, the thing is, the kids, like in any enterprise, the Yu-Gi-Oh language I showed you is a formal kind of register that, in a sense, regiments the game. And you do have to come to know how does experience translate into it. It doesn't mean that's the only register the kids are using, right? They're using all, including manipulative language. They're using all sorts of social. I'm just saying, you've got a problem here, because one register involved here, the Yu-Gi-Oh register, it is not possible to win this game successfully very long if you don't understand anything in the language of the cards, right? If you can't really be strategic. You can't choose good decks. That does not say, and it's good, real mastery, and I discussed this in some of the books, but real mastery is a period of learning new challenging stuff where it's pretty hard, and then practicing that until it's automatic pilot. See, that's what you're. So now the kid's played those. Maybe he's played one deck too long too. But you know, so now he's. But see, what happens on a real mastery is then, when it's on automatic pilot, real experts seek out new challenges. They seek, and then they have to reopen that routine mastery. Think about it again. Learn something new. Integrate it with that routine mastery. Then make that routine. Now, this is not just children. Standard adults who think they're experts often just routinize the expertise, right? So what you're accusing the kids of, 92% of academics do. They look smart only because they did syntax for 27 years. And they're doing the same stuff the same way. And they look really smart until they had to learn a new theory. Then they're blown. So I'm, you know, what's interesting to me is I want, especially in a world where, you know, we're going to be out of business soon, I want experts like you guys and children to become the sort of expert who seeks out new challenges to undo their mastery. When I say that modding is a higher end part of games, that does not mean everybody mods, but it means I want more and more people to have that opportunity, because I want more kids to play Yu-Gi-Oh! With, like the kids who say, I want to write the cards, I want to design the cards, I want to think of a new game. It's getting boring now. I want to take on a different, I want to go do Magic the Gathering, I want to do Hearthstone, I want to do something. That's what I want. But you're absolutely right. Some kids are slackers, and most adults are slackers. That's why we've got the world we've got. You're in Manhattan, you're gonna, you know, all of you need a snorkel, and I bet not one of you has a snorkel at home. So when the place is flooded, you won't even see the fish on the bottom. You have a snorkel? Great. See, there's a smart woman. Excellent. Look, I mean, this is a real issue for educators. The goal of education, in my opinion, you must have a teacher. I've only told you why. But the goal is not for you to remain there. The goal is for you to make the person what some people call a deliberate learner, which means a person who can teach themselves. And that deliberate learner will, if they're good, constantly seek out opportunities to undo the ritual that they're doing. But, you know, but let's not hold them to any higher standard than we hold ourselves to. All right, I think we're done. Yeah.